My mom laughed with a soup ladle still in her hand and told me I'd never own a home like my sister's. My dad nodded along, the way he always does when she says something she wants to stay said. My sister just smiled at her plate. I was 34, sitting at the same table I'd eaten at since I was 6, and I did not argue. A week later, I invited her over for tea at my place, and she never even sat down. The second she stepped inside, she went white, pulled out her phone, and called our mother screaming. What happened in that hallway is the reason I'm telling you all of this. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where quiet women keep the receipts and let the truth do the shouting. I'm Nora, I'm 34, and I build houses for a living, which is exactly why this story ends the way it does. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. It started at Sunday dinner, the way most of it always did. My mother, Carol, had her phone propped against the gravy boat, scrolling photos of my sister's new house, Ridgeview Court. A 2-story with a stone front, an arched entry, and a kitchen island the size of my truck bed. She turned the screen toward me like she was showing me the ocean for the first time. "Walnut floors, Nora," she said. "Do you know what walnut costs?" I did, actually. I know what everything in a house costs, down to the nails. But I just said it looked nice. My father, Ray, nodded from the end of the table. "Bree did good," he said, and left it there. My sister sat across from me, cutting her chicken into smaller and smaller pieces, pretending she wasn't listening. Then my mother set the ladle down, folded her hands, and delivered it clean, like a verdict she'd rehearsed. "Honey," she said, "you'll never own a home like your sister's." Nobody flinched. That was the part that got me. Not the sentence. The silence after it. The way it landed on the table and nobody moved to lift it off. Bree finally looked up. "You're just jealous, right?" she said, and smiled that soft, tired smile she saves for when she wants to sound kind while she isn't. I wrapped both hands around my tea glass. My knuckles are scarred and my palms are rough, and I have never once been ashamed of that. I looked at the photo again, at the arched entry, at the roofline behind it, and that was the moment the whole night changed for me, though not one of them noticed. Because I'd seen something in that picture. Something none of them could see. Something that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. Let me tell you who I am, because it matters for what comes next. I run a small remodeling outfit called Holt & Co. It's really just me, 2 guys I trust, and a truck that's older than my nephew. I've been swinging a hammer for 11 years. I learned framing from a man who'd correct a wall by a 1/16 of an inch and make you redo it. And I have never forgotten what a 1/16 of an inch can do to a house over time. 3 years ago, I bought a wreck on Maple Street. The floor joists were rotted, the roof sagged, and everyone told me to bulldoze it. Instead, I gutted it to the studs and rebuilt it right, one paycheck at a time. I did the load calculations myself. I pulled every permit. I passed every inspection because I wanted to, not because someone made me. It took me 2 years and most of my savings, and I live there now, in a house I understand all the way to the bones. I don't talk about it much. That's my flaw, if you want to name one. I pour everything into the work and almost nothing into explaining myself, and I've learned that people fill the silence with whatever story is easiest for them. For my family, the easy story was that quiet meant struggling. That a woman with dirt under her nails and no husband and a small house must be the one who fell behind. I let them believe it for years. It was simpler than the truth. But that photo of Bree's house bothered me for a reason I couldn't say out loud yet. Not at that table. Not with that ladle still warm on its dish. You have to understand my sister to understand the rest. Bree is 3 years older than me, 37 now. For as long as I can remember, she was the one who made our mother's face light up in church. The one whose name got said first when the neighbors asked how the girls were doing. She married Del Vance 6 years ago. Del calls himself a developer. He wears a good watch and talks about opportunities the way other men talk about the weather, and he'd built a handful of houses out on the new side of town before Ridgeview. I never liked him, but I kept that to myself, because disliking a man for the way he talks is not a reason, and I try to have reasons. Bree wasn't cruel to me, exactly. She was worse. She was gentle about it. She'd touch my arm and ask if work was slow lately, and tell me there was no shame in renting, and mean every soft word as a small knife. That afternoon, when she said, "You're just jealous, right?" She wasn't being mean. She genuinely could not imagine another explanation for the look on my face. She'd been the successful one so long that my expression could only mean envy. It couldn't mean what it actually meant, which was worry. Because there was one more thing about Dell's houses that I hadn't said out loud to anyone. Every one of them had been finished by the same general contractor, a man named Kip Dolan. And 2 years back, Kip Dolan had called me to sub some framing on a job, and I'd walked off the site by lunch and never gone back. I had my reasons for that too. And now my sister was living inside his work. My parents were the other half of it, and I need to be fair to them, even now. My mother has spent her whole life keeping score in a town that pretends not to. Who got the good pew, whose kids went to college, whose daughter married up. When Bree married Dell and the houses started going up, my mother finally had a card worth playing, and she played it everywhere. The church committee, the beauty parlor, the grocery line. My daughter's house on Ridgeview. She said it so often it stopped being about Bree and started being about her. It was her scoreboard, and it was finally winning. My father was quieter about all of it, and lately quieter than usual. He'd had a rough winter, a heart thing, 2 nights in the hospital, a stack of bills that came in envelopes he stopped opening at the table. I noticed he'd gone still whenever money came up around Bree and Dell. He'd look at his plate, same as I did. I didn't think much of it then. I filed it away, the way I file a hairline crack I'm not sure about yet. Mark it, watch it, come back. My mother caught me watching him once and read it wrong, the way she read everything about me wrong. "Don't start," she said, though I hadn't said a word. And that told me more than anything. You don't warn somebody off a subject unless the subject has teeth. 2 days later, my mother called about the housewarming. Bree and Dell were throwing a big open house at Ridgeview, the whole family, the neighbors, half the church. My mother informed me, in the tone she uses for things that are not requests, that I would be there, and I would be gracious. "You can at least go and be happy for your sister," she said. I could hear the scoreboard in her voice. Normally, I'd have grunted something and hung up. Instead, I surprised us both. "Before that," I said, "why doesn't Bree come see my place? I'll make tea. She's never really looked at what I did on Maple Street." There was a pause on the line, the kind you get when someone can't figure out your angle. "Your place," my mother repeated, like I'd offered to show off a shed. "Sure," she said finally, because saying no would have made her look ungracious, and appearances are her whole religion. She thought I was being small and sweet, and a little pathetic, reaching for a scrap of pride before the big event. That's what she told Bree, I found out later. That poor Nora wanted to show off her fixer-upper. Let her have it. But that isn't what I was doing. I wasn't reaching for a scrap of anything. I'd made a decision at that dinner table somewhere between the walnut floors and, "You're just jealous, right?" And the invitation was the first quiet move in it. I wanted my sister inside my house. I wanted her to stand in a place that was built honest, and I wanted to watch her face when she felt the difference under her feet. Because I already suspected what she'd feel. I just needed her to feel it first. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my mother's photos, the ones she'd sent to the whole family, and I did what I do. I zoomed in, not on the walnut floors or the island, on the roofline, on the corners, on the parts nobody's supposed to look at, which is exactly where a house tells the truth. The ridge of the roof had a dip in it, subtle, maybe an inch of sag over a long run, the kind of thing a homeowner would never notice and a framer sees from the street. The flashing over the entry was lapped the wrong way, so water would run behind it instead of over it. And in one photo, at the corner where the big front wall met the ground, there was a hairline crack in the foundation stone, already showing after less than a year. New houses settle, but they don't do that. Not like that. Not that fast. Not there. That corner was doing the work of holding up the whole front of the house, and it was already complaining. You don't get that from bad luck. You get it from a footing that was poured wrong, or too shallow, or too fast, and then dressed up pretty on top so it photographs like a magazine. Somebody had spent real money making that house look finished. And somebody had saved real money making sure it wasn't. I sat there a long time with that. Because if I was right, it meant the beautiful house my whole family was bowing to was hollow in the places that mattered. And it meant my sister and her husband either didn't know, or they did. I don't like guessing. Guessing is how people get hurt in my line of work. So the next morning, I made a call. There's a woman named Deb who's been doing drywall in this county for 30 years. And Deb knows everything, because everybody talks to the drywall crew like they're furniture. I asked her, casual, if she'd worked any of Del Vance's jobs. She went quiet in a way that answered before she did. I did the one before Ridgeview, she said. Got stiffed for 6 weeks. Kip Dolan kept saying the draw hadn't come through, then the draw came through and I still had to fight for it. She told me the crews on those jobs were always being rushed, that inspections got scheduled, and then somehow the inspector already came by, that Del liked to bring his own appraiser. Every word she said fit the picture in that photo like a key in a lock. Rushed work. Money moving strange. Corners cut in the literal corners. I thanked her and sat in my truck in her driveway for a while, not turning the key. Because there's a difference between disliking your brother-in-law and understanding that your sister might be standing inside a lie with her name on the mortgage. One is family gossip. The other is the kind of thing that ruins people. And I realized, sitting there, that whatever I did next, I couldn't unknow it. My mother had told me I'd never own a home like my sister's. She had no idea she might be right for a reason none of us wanted. If you've ever been the quiet one at the table while everyone praised the loud success in the family, stay with me. I promise this house has more inside it than granite. Comment the word walls if you already know where this is going, and keep watching. Tea day came on a Thursday. Bree pulled up to Maple Street in her spotless SUV and sat in it for a second before she got out, checking the address like she couldn't believe this was the place. She came up the walk in nice shoes, looking at my porch the way you look at a stranger's dog. It's cute, she said. Cozy. Both of those are words people use when they can't find anything true to say. I held the door and let her in. And then she stopped. She stopped the way you stop when a floor doesn't do what you expect. Because my floor doesn't bounce. It doesn't creak. It's dead solid. Joists 16 inches on center. Sistered and blocked. The way you do it when nobody's watching and you still care. She took another step and I watched her feel it. The difference between a house that's built and a house that's dressed. She ran her hand along the door casing, which is tight. No gaps. No caulk hiding a bad cut. Her eyes went up to the ceiling line, straight as a rule. I saw her do the math without knowing she was doing it. This little house, this cute, cozy fixer-upper her poor sister lived in, was more solid than the 2-story palace she slept in every night. And I watched something worse arrive on her face, right behind the surprise. Recognition. She'd seen the inside of her own house once, before the drywall went up. She'd seen her own corners, and standing in mine, feeling what right felt like, a memory she'd buried for a year came loose all at once. She pulled her phone out of her purse. Her hand wasn't steady. She didn't say a word to me. She just stared at my straight ceiling line like it was accusing her, and she dialed. I only heard her half of it, but her half was enough. Mom, she said, and her voice cracked on that single word. Mom, you need to get here. Now. Whatever my mother said back, Bree wasn't listening to it. No. No. Just come. Come to Nora's. She turned away from me, toward the window, one hand pressed flat against her own stomach like she was holding something in. I can't. I'll tell you when you're here. Just get in the car. She hung up and stood there with her back to me for a long moment. When she turned around, her mascara had started to go, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her since we were kids, before she became the successful one, and I became the quiet one. She looked scared. "What did you do to your floors?" she said. It wasn't really a question about floors. I told her the truth. "I built them right," I said. "That's all. I just built them right." She laughed, but it came out wrong, more like a sound you make when something hurts. "You have no idea," she started, and then she stopped herself, because she wasn't ready to say it. Not to me, not yet. She grabbed her purse off my counter. "I have to go. Mom's coming." And she left, fast, without the tea, without her coat buttoned, leaving my front door open behind her. I stood in my honest little hallway and listened to her SUV tear out of Maple Street. I hadn't said one cruel thing. I hadn't accused anyone of anything. All I'd done was let my sister stand on a floor that was built right. And that, apparently, was enough to break something open. Here's what she actually saw, and why it hit her that hard. In my back hallway, I had a section of wall opened up. I was in the middle of running a new circuit, so the drywall was off and the framing was exposed. Studs, wiring, the header over the doorway, all of it out in the open, like an anatomy lesson. To most people, it's just a mess. To Bree, it was a mirror, because she'd seen her own house at that same stage. Dell had walked her through Ridgeview during construction, proud, showing off their investment, and she'd stood in her own hallway and looked at her own bones. She hadn't understood what she was seeing then. She'd nodded at studs and wiring the way you nod at a language you don't speak. But she'd stored the picture. And she'd stored something else, too. Something she'd tried hard to forget. During the build, she'd overheard two of Dell's framers arguing with him in that very hallway. One of them kept saying the headers over the openings were too small for the span, that they had to be doubled, and Dell told him it was fine, to close it up, that the inspector wasn't coming back out. She hadn't known what a header was, but she'd known the word, and she'd heard the fear in the man's voice, and she'd filed it away with all the other small wrong things she'd decided not to look at. So when she stood in my hallway and saw my headers done right, doubled, solid, carrying their load the way they're supposed to, that buried argument came back with a name attached. She wasn't reading my studs like a builder. She was hearing that framer again, a year too late, and finally understanding what he'd been trying to tell her. One honest wall handed her the translation for every warning she'd swallowed. That's the cruel thing about the truth. Sometimes you carry it around inside you for months, and all it takes is one honest wall to make it legible. She didn't need me to say a word. Her own memory did the accusing. And now she was driving to her mother, faster than she should, carrying the worst realization of her life in her chest, and she still didn't know the half of what I'd already found out from Deb, and from that hairline crack in the cornerstone. People ask me sometimes why I do it the hard way, why I sister every joist and pull every permit and wait on inspectors when nobody's checking, and the cheaper way would pass a walkthrough fine. I have a short answer for that, and I gave it to Deb once, years ago, on a job where the foreman wanted me to bury a bad cut behind trim. Walls don't lie. People do. A wall will hold up exactly what it was built to hold up, no more, and it will tell the truth about how it was built the day something goes wrong. A storm, a flood, a heavy snow load, a buyer's inspector with a flashlight. You can lie to a bank. You can lie to your neighbors. You can lie to your own mother in a grocery line for 30 years. But you cannot lie to a header that's carrying more than it was sized for. Sooner or later, it sags, and the sag doesn't care about your reputation. That's why I do it the hard way. Not because I'm noble, because I've seen what the easy way costs, and it always costs more, and it always comes due at the worst possible moment, in front of the worst possible people. Standing in my hallway after Bree tore out of the driveway, I looked at my own open wall, my honest studs, my protected wire, and I thought about Ridgeview, about all those neighbors and church folks about to gather inside a house that was lying to every one of them. My mother had turned that house into her scoreboard, and a scoreboard, it turns out, is a terrible thing to build on a bad foundation. Walls don't lie. I just had to decide what I was going to do with the truth. My mother got to Maple Street in under 20 minutes, which is a record, and she did not come to admire my floors. She came in the front door I'd left open and started before she'd cleared the threshold. "What did you say to your sister?" Her voice was high and fast, not the smooth committee voice she uses in public. "She's a wreck. She won't tell me anything. She just keeps saying your name." "What did you do?" My father came in behind her, slower, and stood by the door with his hat in his hands like a man at a funeral. "I told my mother the truth, which is that I hadn't done anything. That Bree came for tea, walked in, and got upset on her own." "You planted something in her head," my mother said. "You've always been jealous of that girl, and now you're trying to poison her against her own home. And here's the thing I noticed, the thing that changed how I saw the whole night." My mother wasn't angry. Underneath the volume, she was scared. She wasn't defending Bree's happiness. She was defending Bree's house, specifically, and she was doing it before she could possibly know there was anything to defend it from. You don't rush to a wall unless you already suspect it's cracked. I looked at my father by the door, and he wouldn't meet my eyes, and that told me the rest. They knew. Maybe not the details. Maybe not the word fraud. But somewhere under all that pride, both of them already knew that Ridgeview was built on something soft, and they had decided, a long time ago, that the family reputation was worth more than the truth. My mother had come to my house to make me apologize for noticing. That night, after they left, I made myself a cup of the tea Bree never drank, and I sat down at my kitchen table and stopped guessing. Our county puts building permits online. Anyone can look. Most people never do, because they don't know what they're looking at, but I know exactly what I'm looking at. I typed in Bree's address on Ridgeview Court and waited for the page to load. New construction like that leaves a paper trail, a permit, a series of inspections, and on a construction loan. Something called draw inspections, where the bank sends someone to confirm the work is really done before it releases the next chunk of money. I read the file twice to be sure I wasn't seeing what I wanted to see. The permit was there. The final was marked complete, signed off, the house declared finished. But between the framing inspection and that final sign-off, there should have been a third draw inspection on a house that size. It wasn't there. The record simply jumped from framing to final, skipping the step where somebody was supposed to walk the structure and confirm it before the biggest draw of money went out. And the name on the appraisal was one I recognized, a name that had shown up in a county notice the year before, flagged in a batch of inflated valuations out on the new side of town. I printed all of it. The permit history, the missing inspection, the appraiser's name. I slid the pages into a plain manila folder and I set that folder on my kitchen table, in the spot where I could see it every time I walked through. The county's own website said the third inspection never happened. That wasn't my opinion. That wasn't jealousy. That was the government's own record, in black and white, sitting in a yellow folder on my honest table. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept getting up and looking at the folder like it might have changed its mind, and somewhere around 2 a.m, standing in my kitchen in the dark, I thought about the ladle, about my mother holding it up like a gavel and saying, "You'll never own a home like your sister's." For years, a sentence like that would have sat in my chest for weeks. I'd have turned it over, wondered what was wrong with me, worked a little harder and said a little less. That's what over-responsible people do. We assume the problem is us. We fix and never say the thing out loud. But standing there at 2 a.m, that sentence didn't hurt anymore. It had turned into something else in my hands. It had turned into a compass. She was right. I would never own a home like my sister's. Mine was built honest. Hers was built on a skipped inspection and a crooked appraisal and a header that was already carrying more than it should. I would never own a home like that, and thank God for it. The words that were supposed to shrink me had, without my mother meaning it, told me exactly who I was and exactly who they were. I put the folder down and I finally went to bed. I understood by then that this was no longer about a photo or a floor. It was about a family that had chosen a beautiful lie over an ugly truth and had built a whole scoreboard on top of it, and had told me my whole life that I was the one who came up short. You'll never own a home like your sister's. No. And I'm going to be all right. My father called me the next evening, which he almost never does. My mother is the one who calls. When I saw his name on the phone, I knew it cost him something to dial it. He didn't start with hello. Nora, he said, leave it be. His voice was tired in a way I hadn't heard even during the hospital nights. Whatever you think you found, whatever you're doing, leave it be. For the family. I asked him what he was afraid of. There was a long silence, and I could hear the television in the background, my mother's world going on in the next room. And then my father told me something he'd been carrying alone. Back in the winter, with the medical bills stacking up and the heart scare fresh, he'd gone to Dell for help. Dell had an opportunity. My father had given him money, a chunk of what was left of his retirement, to put into the Ridgeview project, with a promise it would come back doubled when the house sold. He's family, my father said, and I could hear how much he needed that to be a reason. So there it was. My father wasn't protecting Bree's happiness or my mother's pride. He was protecting his own money, the last of it, because if Ridgeview was a fraud, then his retirement was gone, and admitting that out loud would make it real. He wasn't a villain the way the movies do it. He was just a scared old man who'd made a bad bet on the wrong son-in-law and couldn't afford, in any sense, to be wrong. Dad, I said, how much? But he wouldn't say the number. And that number, the one he wouldn't say, was the thing I still needed to find. The next piece I went and got myself. Deb had mentioned a name, an electrician who'd worked the Ridgeview job and never got paid right. His name was Tom Reese, and I knew him a little from the supply house, so I drove out to his shop on a Saturday and asked him straight. Tom didn't want to talk at first. Guys who've been stiffed usually don't. There's shame in it, like it was your fault for trusting the check. But when I told him I wasn't there to make trouble for him, that I was trying to understand what happened on that house, he set down his coffee and told me. Dell had him wire the whole place, then held his final payment. When Tom pushed, Dell told him he had to sign a lien waiver first, the paper that says a contractor's been paid and gives up the right to put a lien on the property. And then the money would come. Tom signed it. The money never came. He needed the waivers to close the loan, Tom said. Bank won't fund if there's open liens, so he got us all to sign that we'd been paid, and then he didn't pay us. I sat with that, because that's not a man who ran out of money and felt bad about it. That's a man who collected signatures saying he'd paid people, specifically so a bank would release money, specifically before anyone could stop him. The waivers, the skipped inspection, the crooked appraisal, the rushed crews. None of it was sloppiness. Sloppiness is random. This was aimed. This was a plan, built as carefully as a house, and a lot less honest than one. I thanked Tom and drove home to my yellow folder, and I added a page. I could have mailed that folder to a reporter and walked away clean. But my mother spent 30 years telling this town who mattered in our family, and she did it in that woman's parlor and that church basement, in every room where it counted. So I decided to let her pick the room where the truth came out too. Keep watching. The housewarming is next. I want to be honest about what I chose, because I thought about it hard. I could have gone to the sheriff quietly. I could have called a lawyer or a reporter or the bank's fraud line and let it all happen off in some office where nobody I loved would have to watch. That would have been the clean way. It also would have been the coward's way, for me, in this family. Because the wound in my family was never really about the fraud. The fraud was new. The wound was old. It was 30 years of my mother standing in public rooms, telling public people that one daughter mattered and one daughter didn't. The lie about Ridgeview and the lie about me were the same lie, just aimed in two directions. And a lie told in public has to be answered in public, or it doesn't heal. It just goes quiet and waits. So I made my decision. I wasn't going to sneak. I wasn't going to scream either. That's my mother's instrument, not mine. I was going to bring the truth into the exact room she'd chosen to celebrate the lie, and I was going to set it down gently, in front of the same audience she'd been performing for my whole life, and let them see it with their own eyes. Not out of cruelty. because that room was where the damage lived, and that room was where it had to be undone. I looked at my yellow folder and I understood I wasn't collecting evidence for a court. I was collecting it for a housewarming. And there was one more person I needed to bring into it. Someone whose job was the truth, so that when I set the folder down, it wouldn't just be my word against my mother's. Her name was Marisol Reyes, and she was a building inspector for the county. I'd met her over the years the way tradespeople meet inspectors. Across a lot of framing, some of it mine, some of it other people's. She was fair, and she was thorough, and she did not care whose feelings got hurt by a code violation, which is exactly what you want in an inspector and exactly what Dell had spent so much effort avoiding. I didn't ask her for a favor. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to how this ends. I filed a formal complaint. That's a real thing you can do. A citizen can report a possible permit violation, and if the record shows a missing inspection on a completed home, the county has to look. I brought her copies from my folder. She read the permit history, the skipped draw inspection, the appraiser's name. She didn't gasp or take my side. She just went still and professional. If the third inspection wasn't done and the house was signed off as final, she said, that's a problem, and it's the county's problem, not just yours. She told me she'd need to pull the internal draw records and come out for a preliminary site visit first to verify the discrepancy and issue notice before the county could schedule a full reinspection of the structure. I asked her when. She checked her calendar, and then she said something that told me I wasn't the only one who'd been noticing a pattern. Ridgeview wasn't the only house tied to that flagged appraiser. The county had already opened a review of a batch of permits on the new side of town, and Dell's projects were sitting in that stack. My complaint didn't start anything from nothing. It just pushed one address to the top of a file that was already open. The soonest she could get out to Ridgeview Court for that first visit, with the paperwork moving the way paperwork moves, was Saturday. Midday. The exact day, the exact hours, my mother had chosen for the housewarming. I didn't arrange that. I just didn't get in its way. Bree texted me twice that week. The first one came at midnight and just said, "Why are you doing this?" No question mark. I didn't answer, because I didn't have a kind answer, and I didn't want to send an unkind one. The second came 2 days later, and it was longer, and it was the most honest thing my sister had said to me in years. She said she'd started to see it too. That she'd noticed things over the past year and told herself she was imagining them. A door that never quite closed. A crack Dell had handled. Contractors who came to the house angry and left quiet. She said she'd asked Dell once, directly, if everything about the loan was okay, and he'd smiled and told her not to worry her pretty head, and she'd let herself be told. "I have 2 kids," she wrote. "This is our whole life. If it comes apart, we have nothing." And I understood, reading it, that my sister was not simply a villain and not simply a victim. She was a woman who had seen enough to be afraid and had chosen not to see the rest, because the rest was unlivable. She'd traded her own eyes for her own house. I felt sorry for her in a way that surprised me, but I noticed something else in that text too, under the fear. She knew more than she was admitting. She'd asked about the loan. She'd watched Dell handle a crack. Some part of my sister had been standing at the edge of the truth for a year, choosing every single day not to step forward. And I could not save her from that choice. I could only stop making it for her. While I was quietly getting ready, my mother was loudly getting ready too, and she was doing my work for me without knowing it. Word had gotten around, the way it does in a small town, that there was tension between the sisters. That Nora had upset Bree. My mother could not stand a story she didn't control, so she went on offense. She called relatives. She called church friends. She told a version where I was the jealous younger sister, unmarried, behind in life, trying to spoil my sister's big moment out of spite. And then she did the thing that sealed it. To kill the rumor, she made the housewarming bigger. She invited more people. She wanted a packed house, a triumphant crowd, so that when I skulked in looking bitter, the whole town could see my sister's success surrounding her and put the gossip to rest. She was assembling an audience to shame me. She had no idea she was assembling witnesses. I almost felt bad about it. Almost. Because I hadn't lifted a finger to build that crowd, and she'd built it herself, out of her own need to win in public. Every extra chair she added, every neighbor she pressed to come, was one more person who'd be standing in that house when the county inspector knocked on the door. My mother had spent her whole life curating rooms to make herself look good. And now, for the first time, she'd curated one that was going to tell the truth. I got a call from a cousin, warning me that, "Your mom's really got it out for you, honey. Maybe just don't come." I thanked her for the heads up, and I told her I'd be there. I wouldn't have missed it. The night before the housewarming, my father came to Maple Street alone. He didn't call first. I heard his old sedan in the driveway and opened the door, and he stood on my honest porch looking older than I'd ever seen him. I made coffee. He sat at my table, a foot from the yellow folder, and he didn't ask what was in it, because I think he already knew. We sat a long time without talking. That's a thing my father and I have always been able to do. Sit in a silence that isn't empty. Finally, he said, "I knew something was wrong with that house." He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle. From the start, the way Dell talked. Too smooth. I told myself I was being an old fool. He looked at me then, and his eyes were wet, and he didn't wipe them. "I gave him the money anyway, because your mother wanted it to be true so bad, and because I was scared, and it was easier to be a fool than to be broke." He didn't apologize. Not really. He didn't say he was sorry for all the years of nodding along while my mother measured me and found me short. He wasn't able to go that far. But he told me the truth, which for my father is a kind of apology, the only kind he has. "You'll never own a home like your sister's," he said, quiet, almost to himself, repeating my mother's words back into the room. Then he shook his head slowly. "Thank God," he said. And that was as close as my father ever came to taking my side. It wasn't enough, but it wasn't nothing either. He finished his coffee and drove home in the dark. Saturday came clear and cool, a good day for a party, a better day for the truth. I got up early. I did not put on war paint or a fancy dress. I wore clean work clothes, a pressed pair of dark jeans, a good flannel, my boots wiped down. I wanted to walk into that room looking exactly like what I am, because what I am was the whole point. I ate breakfast standing at my counter, looking at the yellow folder. I'd read it so many times I could have recited it, but I read it once more anyway, the way you check a load calculation before you cut the beam. Permit. Missing draw inspection. Flagged appraiser. Tom Reese and his lien waiver. Deb and the stiffed cruise. My father's money, the amount still unknown, poured into the same hole as everyone else's. Around 10, Marisol texted me. She'd be at Ridgeview around noon, she said, to pull records and inspect. Right in the thick of the party. I texted back a single word. Thanks. Then I put the folder under my arm, the way you carry something you've already decided about. I wasn't nervous, which surprised me. I'd expected to be. But there's a particular calm that comes over you when the guessing is finally done, and all that's left is to do the thing. I'd spent my whole life at that family's tables being quiet while other people talked. Today, I was going to be quiet again, but for a completely different reason. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I didn't need to. I had the county's own records in a folder and the county's own inspector on her way. Some things say themselves, if you just carry them into the right room and set them down. Ridgeview Court looked like a magazine when I pulled up, which is the whole trick of a house like that. Cars lined both sides of the street, balloons on the mailbox. Through the big front windows I could see it packed. Relatives, neighbors, half the church, my mother moving through the crowd in her good dress, glowing queen of a room she'd built to bury me. I parked down the block and walked up with the folder under my arm. The stone front was beautiful. I looked at the corner as I passed, at that hairline crack, a little longer now than in the photo. Nobody else even glanced at it. I stepped inside onto the famous walnut floors and I could feel them give, just slightly, under the weight of the crowd, that faint bounce that told me everything about the joists underneath. My mother spotted me, and her smile went tight and victorious. But Bree saw me first, really saw me, saw the yellow folder under my arm, and every drop of color left her face. She crossed the room to me fast and got close, and whispered so no one could hear. "Please," she said, "you're just jealous, right? Tell me you're just jealous." Her voice was shaking on the same words she'd used to cut me at that dinner table. Except now she wasn't accusing me. She was begging me to make it be true. Because if I was just jealous, then her house was fine, and her life was fine, and none of what she already knew was real. I didn't answer my sister. I put a hand on her arm, gentle, the way she used to put a hand on mine when she was slipping me a knife, and I stepped past her into the middle of the room. Dell was holding court by the granite island, telling some man about the vision for the next development. I walked up while he was mid-sentence, and I waited for him to notice me, and the room started to quiet the way rooms do when they sense something. When he finally looked at me, I asked him one thing, and I asked it softly, so the people nearby had to lean in to hear. "Dell," I said, "where's the third draw inspection on this house?" He blinked. Just for a second, but I saw it. The smooth went out of him. "I'm sorry?" he said, and gave the crowd a little laugh, the "what is she talking about" laugh. I didn't laugh with him. "The third draw inspection," I said, same soft voice. "The bank's supposed to confirm the framing before it funds the big draw. The county has no record it was ever done. Which makes me wonder what the bank was shown before it released the money." The man he'd been talking to took a small step back. My mother appeared at Dell's shoulder, sensing trouble. Her smile still on, but her eyes gone hard. I looked at all of them. This whole room of people who'd spent years bowing to this house, and I said the only sermon I've ever really believed. "Walls don't lie," I said. "People do." Then I set the folder down on the granite island, right in the middle of the party, next to the cheese board and the good napkins, and I opened it. I didn't make a speech. I just laid the pages out where people could see them, one at a time, like a hand of cards. The permit history, with the county seal on it. The line where the third inspection should have been and wasn't. The appraiser's name, next to a printout of the county notice that had flagged him the year before. Tom Reese's name and the lien waiver he'd signed for money that never came. People leaned in. Somebody's neighbor put on reading glasses. My mother pushed to the front and snatched the top page off the stone, and I watched her read it, and I watched her hand begin to shake, because my mother can spin a rumor but she cannot argue with a county seal in front of her whole church. She looked up at me, and for 1 second all the performance fell off her face, and there was just fear underneath. Naked. And I looked back at my mother, calm as my own straight ceiling line, and I gave her back the exact sentence she'd handed me across the dinner table with a soup ladle in her hand. "You told me," I said quietly, so only the people who mattered could hear, "that I'd never own a home like my sister's." I let it sit there on the granite. "You were right." That's when the knock came. Not a loud knock. A firm, official one, the kind that doesn't wait long for an answer. Marisol Reyes stepped into the front hall in her county jacket, clipboard in hand, right on time, right into the middle of the crowd my mother had assembled. The room went quiet in a new way. "I'm looking for the owner," Marisol said. "County received a complaint about a permit discrepancy on this property. I need to see the draw inspection records, and I'll need to walk the structure." Dell started talking fast then, the smooth all gone, saying there'd been a mistake, saying he had paperwork somewhere, saying this wasn't the time. Marisol didn't argue with him. She just took out a form, filled in the address, and taped a printed notice to the frame of that beautiful arched doorway. "Notice of violation, records required, structures subject to reinspection, and to be declared unsafe if the record held up. No magic, no trick. Just a woman doing her job, hanging a piece of paper on a lie." Bree made a sound I'll never forget. She turned to Dell in front of everyone. in front of her mother and her neighbors and her church. And the words that came out of her were the same words she'd used on me, only now she finally understood how hollow they were. "You're just jealous, right?" she said to no one, to herself, to the whole year she'd spent not looking. Then she looked at her husband and said it plain. "You did this. You did this to us." And the beautiful house went silent around them. Then it all came apart at once, the way a bad structure does, not slowly, but all in the same second. My mother rounded on me in front of everyone, her committee voice gone, her real voice loud and ugly. "How dare you?" she said. "How dare you do this to your own sister in her own home in front of everyone?" Spit at the corner of her mouth,